How do you spell unfair? Magnolia Cox and the National Spelling Bee by Carole Boston Weatherford, illustrated by Frank Morrison. There is a note here at the beginning of the book, this foreword, that Miss Dady will read at the end of the book for those who want to know more. But essentially it's saying that the Scripps National Spelling Bee is a big event and it happens every year. Magnolia Cox was no ordinary kid. Her idea of fun was reading the dictionary. From A to Z, she learned words, meanings, and spellings. She loved to read, study, and spell. In 1936, the 8th grader won her school spelling bee. After Magnolia passed a 50-word written test and an oral competition, she advanced to the Beacon Journal newspaper's citywide bee. That April evening, Magnolia faced 50 of the city's best spellers. 3,000 people jammed the armory in Akron, Ohio. Can you spell nervous? Nervous. With butterflies in her stomach and a lump in her throat, Magnolia listened to pronunciations and definitions before spelling out each word. Magnolia got ruled out. Teary-eyed, she got her coat and hat and prepared to go home. But someone urged her to stay. Due to an error, the judges brought her back. Magnolia correctly spelled daft, writ, pretentious, brusque, abstemious, graduate, felicitate, and apoplexy. Can you even pronounce those words? In the final rounds of the bee, Magnolia battled back and forth with John Huddleston until he tripped up on the word sciatic. After spelling the word that John had missed, Magnolia had just one more word to the title. Voluble. Voluble. With those 7 letters, Magnolia became the first African American to win the Akron Spelling Bee. Her prize was $25 and a trip to the National Spelling Bee in Washington, D.C. Can you spell surprised? S-U-R-P-R-I-S-E-D. At events all over Akron, Magnolia was the guest of honor. Backstage at the Palace Theater, the spelling dynamo met dancer and actor Bill Bojangles Robinson and jazz musician and composer Fats Waller. At the Akron City Club, she dined with local bigwigs. African-American clubs held fundraisers, and black churches took up offerings to help her with her travel costs. People also prayed for her. Akronites now mentioned Magnolia Cox in the same breath as the boxing champion Joe Louis and the track star Jesse Owens. Can you spell famous? F-A-M-O-U-S. Letters and telegrams poured in from far and wide. Magnolia's school community was rooting for her too. Her teacher, Miss Grieve, bought her a new dress, and a man gave her a beautiful necklace. Magnolia also received 2 dictionaries to study. She spent 3 periods a day prepping for the National Bee. She memorized 100,000 words. Can you spell dedication? D-E-D-I-C-A-T-I-O-N. At Akron's Union Station, a military band and a crowd of thousands saw the spelling champ off to Washington. For her first train ride, Magnolia got on board with her mother, Miss Grieve, and Mabel Norris, a reporter from the Beacon Journal, the newspaper that sponsored the Akron Bee. This is the most fun I've ever had, said Magnolia. Can you spell excited? E-X-C-I-T-E-D. But she was about to face some hard truths. Can you spell discrimination? D-I-S-C-R-I-M-I-N-A-T-I-O-N. Do you even know what it means? Magnolia would soon find out firsthand. On the train, Magnolia sat in a coach open to black and white passengers. But when the train reached the Maryland state line, she and her mother were forced to move to the blacks-only car. Back then, segregation was the law in the South. When Magnolia arrived in Washington, she and her mother had to stay with a black doctor because the hotel where the other spellers stayed was for white customers only. Magnolia and her mother couldn't even ride the main elevator at the spelling bee banquet. They had to climb the stairs. Inside the banquet hall, they were seated away from the other spellers and their families. She and Elizabeth Kenny from Plainfield, New Jersey, were the first African-American students to compete at the National Spelling Bee since the 9 newspapers founded the competition in 1925. The 2 black girls had to enter the ballroom through a back door and were seated at a card table apart from the other spellers. Can you spell racism? R-A-C-I-S-M. Though second-class treatment met her at every turn, Magnolia couldn't afford to get rattled. She had to concentrate and to believe in herself. She remained calm and nailed word after word. Can you spell focus? Focus. The judges threw harder and harder words at the spellers. In the audience, Miss Grieve, Magnolia's teacher, bit her lip. One by one, the competition fell. Elizabeth Kinney misspelled appellation and placed 10th. When Doris Rubin misspelled acceptability, Magnolia advanced to the final 5. The judges, mostly from the segregated South, couldn't seem to stump her. Then they threw a curveball, a word that Magnolia hadn't studied. Nemesis. Nemesis, she answered. Magnolia's teacher and the newspaper reporter protested. They argued that the word nemesis was not on the official list. Furthermore, in Magnolia's dictionary, the word was a proper noun, referring to the Greek goddess, and thus not acceptable. The judges stood by their decision. Can you spell unfair? Unfair. The judges were looking for nemesis with an E and not an A. Magnolia was out. But what an achievement. She had made history by becoming a finalist in the National Spelling Bee. The spellers spent the rest of the week sightseeing. They visited the White House and the Washington Monument. Magnolia saw stamps being printed at the Bureau of Engraving. Can you spell amazed? Amazed. At the end of the whirlwind trip, Magnolia took home a $75 prize and was honored with a big homecoming parade. Can you spell proud? Proud. Even though she didn't win the championship, Magnolia had proven that African American students are as smart as anyone and can compete and excel when given a level playing field. That was Magnolia's triumph. The end. I'm going to go back now and read this little foreword so we can learn a little bit more about the spelling bee. The Scripps National Spelling Bee is a big event. Contestants representing diverse cultures and nationalities look like a little United Nations, but spelling bees were not always open to anyone who could rise through the ranks. In areas where segregation was the law, citywide spelling bees were whites only. The first time that black and white spellers competed nationally, the white grown-ups were sore losers. In 1908's National Education Association Spelling Bee, 14-year-old Mary Bolden, a black girl from Ohio, led her team to defeat competitors from the other cities around the country, including the all-white team from New Orleans. A writer for the New Orleans Picayune newspaper claimed that Marie, who correctly spelled 400 words in writing and another 100 words orally, had bested white spellers because they were distracted by her presence. Angry white readers wrote to Picayune calling for the school superintendent to be fired for putting white students in such an embarrassing situation. But for Booker T. Washington, the famous African-American educator, Marie's achievement was a sign of progress. You will admit that we spell out of the same spelling book that you do, he said, and I think you will admit that we spell a little better. If black children outspelled whites in competition, it would prove that blacks were just as smart as whites and were not inferior, as racists contended. And that's exactly why blacks were barred from many local spelling bees. There would not be another black finalist at a national spelling bee until 1936. And this is the story of Magnolia Cox. So now we're going to skip over to the epilogue to learn a little bit more about the real Magnolia Cox. She was smart enough to excel at any career. However, she could not afford to attend college and wound up working as a maid for a doctor. She died in 1976 at the age of 53. The fight to integrate spelling bees did not start with Cox, nor did it end with her. Since the early 20th century, black students competed in separate spelling bees. In Alabama, there were even a statewide black spelling bee funded by the African-American businessman A.G. Gaston. But the winners of those all-black contests were not allowed to compete in the regional bees, a required step to qualify for the national championship. Nevertheless, African-American students shone in the all-black bees. In December 1961, a notice about the upcoming bee sponsored by Virginia's Lynchburg News went out to local schools, including, mistakenly, the all-black ones. A later letter corrected the error and withdrew the invitation, stating that black schools were not expected to participate. The Lynchburg branch of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP, got involved in the matter. The civil rights organization had waged the legal battle against school segregation that led to the landmark Brown v. Board of Education case. In 1954, the U.S. Supreme Court had ruled that separate but equal schools were unconstitutional. The Lynchburg NAACP contacted the Scripps Howard newspaper publishing group, the sponsor of the National Spelling Bee. Their letter pushed the newspaper publisher to open local spelling bees to all students regardless of skin color. They also threatened the publisher with bad press and legal action for letting spellers from segregated bees rise to the finals. Scripps Howard's replied that local newspapers and schools set their own rules. In 1962, George F. Jackson, a school student from Lynchburg, wrote to President John F. Kennedy, "I'm a 13-year-old colored boy and I like to spell. Do you think you can help me and get the Lynchburg Bee open to all children?" The letter ran in newspapers across the country. Like segregated schools, local spelling bees were slow to integrate. But as other racial barriers fell, local spelling bees opened to African Americans. In 1962, 12-year-old Jocelyn Lee became the first black winner of the Oklahoma City Bee. And in 1965, 15-year-old Chlorine Jones won the first integrated bee to be held in Memphis, Tennessee. In 1998, Jody Ann Maxwell from Jamaica became the first person of African descent to win the Scripps National Spelling Bee. In 2021, 14-year-old Zalia Avant-Garde became the first African American to win the Scripps National Spelling Bee. The winning word was Murraya, the name for a genus of tropical trees. That same year, the U.S. Senate passed a resolution honoring Magnolia Cox's life, legacy, and achievements. And if you want to learn more about Magnolia Cox, here are some of the books and resources that the author used to write this story.